Guys, Joey here from 9 to 5 Escape. Today we're here with the third video of the 4-video installment of the head rebuild for the 2005 4Runner. Show you some of the parts that we went through in this video, putting things back on this time. So the heads came back from the shop, put those on with new head gaskets, one on each side, obviously. The cams went in. Very delicate process, actually broke a piece of the cam in the process, so make sure you do as I say, not as I do. Timing belt went back on with some of these covers and such on the front end, and then put in some of the cooling systems on the top where the bypass joints going between both sides of the heads. That's about it, so hope you enjoy. So the heads are back, they're all cleaned up. Took the cams out and all the bearing caps. Now we're going to put the head gaskets on, the new ones. L is driver's side for left-hand bank, and on the back side are the letters that say 2L. So make sure that the letters are on the back, and then L is driver and R is passenger. I bought OEM ones just because I know they're good. A little more expensive, but gets the job done. So the heads are on. I put all the bolts in with the washers. You gotta use new bolts. Put some oil on the threads and the bolt head between the washer and the bolt head. Snugged them all down. We're going to torque it to 30 foot-pounds in the order that's shown on the repair manual.
That's the left-hand side.
That's the left side, driver's side. And then once they're all torqued down to 30 foot-pounds, you're going to turn them 90 in that order, and then 90 degrees again in that same order.
So we're going to put the exhaust onto the heads now. The heads are on. You need to replace the gasket here. These were stripped, so I had to replace these studs. You have to replace the gasket that goes onto the heads and the manifold. And then you have to buy new nuts to go onto the exhaust manifold. Those are all non-reusable parts. These back here, the nuts that go on here, need to be torqued to 46 foot-pounds. And nuts to the exhaust manifold are 33 foot-pounds. Then after all that's said and done, the heat shield goes on, and the bolts for those are 69 inch-pounds. There's also this water pipe here. There's another gasket that needs to be replaced, and then the gasket for the manifold. It's going to go on the car, and you want to be able to read what side it's on. So with the L, if it's backwards, you can't read it, it's the wrong way. So it's going to go on the car that way, and the manifold's going to go on there. Tough to see, but the gasket's on the manifold. You can see the L, that's how you know it's on the right side. This is looking through the wheel well. So we're under the car, under the exhaust. Here's the cat. The 8 nuts are on the manifold now. These 2 nuts here are going to be torqued to 46 foot-pounds. Before you torque the nuts down, make sure you put a new gasket in between there, slide it into there, it connects onto the exhaust, and then it'll mate together. So here's another view of the bolt that connects the plastic wire harness onto the back of the head. You're just going to tighten this tight enough because it's plastic, it doesn't need to be overly tight. Here's a view of the plate that holds the O2 sensor connector. There's a hole at the back of the head where this bolt goes into. Just tighten it hand tight. So we're putting the heat shield on now. There's 4 bolts that go into it, and there's 69 inch-pounds for each of them. It's a 10mm bolt. We're doing the other side of the exhaust. Again, make sure you put the new gasket on between the cat and the mid-pipe. Put your new exhaust bolts on. the O2 sensor. There's a bolt that holds the bracket on, this goes into, and a new gasket for the exhaust manifold, a new gasket for the water pipe that goes up into the engine bay. This is the intake cam. You need to replace the seal that goes around here. So the first thing is to take off the oil cap. It's I think it's a 19 millimeter. And then there's a bolt inside here that is an Allen. I think it's a 10.
It's a 10.
So that threads out. And then there's these Allens on the back. Yeah, that slides out. And it goes in a certain way, so don't be afraid to mess that up. And then there's these hex bits. I think these are 5s. They come out of the back of the gear. And once these are off, this gear will slide off, and then you can slide this over the back of it. And the correct direction is to put the opening this way, so the face meets up with this face. And then in the process of taking this off the car, we actually damaged this here.
Call it a thrust plate.
Yeah, I think it's a thrust plate. So we're gonna be waiting for the new part of that and starting to work on everything on the other side of the car that we can. Got the new part in for the other cam. You can see that that plate back there isn't broken like this one is. There. So this is going to slide on to here. Actually, it's this one right here. I'm going to attach the old cam gear to the new part. It goes in with these. It's a 5mm hex, and they go in at 66 inch-pounds into the back of this guy. We're going to swap this one out. So after you took this one off, don't forget to put the new seal on. It goes with this slotted part. The slotted part's down here, it goes towards the car. And then this bolt goes in the top here after you slide the cam into the top gear. So this holding the camshaft on is actually 58 foot-pounds with the 10mm hex, and the oil plug is 11 foot-pounds. So make sure you torque this down enough. So we put the cam on the other side. There's the light needs to be on. So cam went on the other side, put in all the bearing caps, loosely tightened them, and these here. Loosely tightened them, and then went back around and torqued them down. This is the order you need to do it in. On this side, this is the left-hand bank. So you can see dots down there. I can see it. I got the light. You can see the dots down there and make sure they're lined up on the cams before you put them in and tighten everything down. It says to line up the one dot with the one dot, but I think the two dots are 180 from each other. Also install the filter before putting the front bearing cap on. And then you need to replace these washers on these 4 bolts for the bearing caps. Before you put this bearing cap on, you have to add the form plates gasket or RTV. It's pretty straightforward. You basically just put it in all of these grooves that you can see, and then stick it on, and it dries quick, so you can do it quickly. And then here is the new oil seal that gets pressed in. You want to definitely press that in before you torque down all the bolts on this, because it's going to get pushed in. And then, like I said, on the other side, we're going to wait for the new part to come in. So we can do everything on the top here
Where's that little plug thing go?
Oh yeah,
That round disc thingy.
there's a plug here that goes in, and it sits into, I think it's,
Yeah, it's in front of the exhaust cam.
yeah, I think it's on this side here, but that also needs sealer around it on both sides, on the top and the bottom of it because it's circular. Put the cams in on the other side. Have to line up the dots again. This side is just the one dot with the one dot. Don't forget to take out your service bolt here. And then you're going to put the bearing caps on. You're going to tighten them. So there's a tightening sequence. And then don't forget for this cap in the front, you're going to be putting on the form-in-place gasket and the new seal washers or the bolts that go in the top. And don't forget to put in your oil little filter there. So cams are in on this side. I forgot to mention it before, but this plug down here, don't forget to put the form-in-place gasket around that and put that in before you put this cam cap on. Now on the back side of the heads, there are these little semicircular notches. There's 2 on each head. You're going to put the form-in-place gasket around the outside of it and in the notch, and then stick it into place. They look like they're universal, so I think it goes either way. Starting the things on the top. First is the water bypass joint on the back. Put new gaskets on here and here. And then this will slide on, and it's 13 foot-pounds for those. Probably close enough, just get them tight. And then I had to get the new tube here that goes up to here and then up to here. There was no O-ring on this side, so I think we're good. It has to go on while you're installing it, otherwise it'll be too long to fit on there. It doesn't flex enough. So there's this wire back here. The back of it has a plastic connector that goes into a metal flange on the top of the, or on the back of the bypass. Make sure you snap those in before you put these in place. Bypass is on. Before we buttoned it all up, we put these canisters on. There's, you remember this bolt here, and there's 2 on the back.
Slide the back ones first before you mount it.
Yeah, before mounting it on and tightening up, put the back one in the hole first. There's also 2 new gaskets. The gaskets go face up like that, and they actually snap onto those canisters where they meet the bypass joint. And then the pipe runs down to the back of the heads, and the pipes connect up to there, back there. And there's a new gasket that goes on. And I believe all of those are supposed to be 7 foot-pounds. Pretty hard to get a torque wrench back there, so we kind of just got it tight with a small box end wrench. So we disconnected this wire here. That little gray piece pops into the back of the harness, right behind the water bypass joint. So these connectors here go into the wire harness. The bottom one is the bigger one. That goes in the bottom, and then the smaller one over here goes into the top up there. So we're putting this crossover pipe in now. This electrical connector goes into that hole. This back part, there's a bolt that goes into there. And the torque is 13 foot-pounds. And then on the front here, you need to put a new O-ring on, and it goes into this part of the front housing of the water pump. Front bypass joints going on. 2 new gaskets, one here and one here. And then it slides on, and then there's 4 nuts that go on at 13 foot-pounds, 2 on this side and 2 on that side. So knock sensors go back into the head here, 66 inch-pounds on the bolt, and then eventually the connector will connect up to here. That's on both sides, over here as well. So at the power steering pump, we had this stud laying around. We took it out when we sent it to the machine shop to get the heads redone. It doesn't really have a torque spec, you just kind of torque it down
and get it to seat against the head, and then the torque spec will be on the nut that goes here that attaches it to it, attaches the pump to it. So putting the VVT valve slides into there. You gotta put a new O-ring on. The old one was pretty crusty and didn't look like it was the same size, but see if it fits. And then this bolts up here at 66 inch-pounds. Putting the engine hangers on, they're 14mm bolts here and back here. The manual says 27 foot-pounds on this side and 12 on that side. I don't really understand why, but I think probably just gonna do both 27, see how it feels. So putting these water hoses on, the shorter one goes here onto the rear bypass joint, and the longer one goes here. And then put the clamps on there, hose clamps. Drop the intake manifold on and putting all of the nuts and bolts on. There's 10 of them. Showed you on the removal, but they're going to be torqued down to 13 foot-pounds. So on the back of the exhaust or intake manifold here, right here, there's a screw that goes in that holds this wire harness, plastic wire harness to the back of the intake. You're not going to be able to fit a torque wrench back there, so we're just going to do tight enough with a box end wrench. So these dust covers have to go on next. There's a bolt, one bolt down there that holds it on. It's 66 inch-pounds, and then the second dust cover goes on top of that. And there's two bolts there that go in at 66 inch-pounds as well, and it's the same on the right-hand bank. There's two bolts that hold the second cover on and one bolt that holds the first cover on.
No, the manual says 66 foot-pounds.
Yeah, the manual still says 66 foot-pounds, but it needs to be inch-pounds. Water inlet housing goes on next. This space mates up to here. You want to put form-in-place gasket in the groove around the outside. Two bolts go into here at 13 foot-pounds. And then you got to put a new O-ring on here, put some soapy water on it so it slides in good and makes a good seal.
Next is the oil dipstick. I'm under the car. Here's the oil pan. The dipstick goes into the hole vertically up here. Routes up, and then it mounts 11 foot-pounds up here, which is on the right above the exhaust manifold, right behind the upper control arm of the wheel well.
So putting in the camshaft position sensor goes on the left-hand bank, driver's side. The stud goes in the bottom hole, and then the bolt goes in the top hole, and that's 66 inch-pounds.
So the pulleys have gone on both sides. There's 4 5mm Allens. It's 72 inch-pounds for each one. The manual actually says 72 foot-pounds. We tried that, and this is what happens when you do that. So 72 inch-pounds.
Putting the belts on, finally. We already put it on because it's supposed to get on, but you want to leave the crank with the key at the top. Then you can turn the cams as much as you want. You're going to turn them clockwise. You're going to line up this tick mark with the housing mark there, and on this side, the red tick mark there with this tick mark. And then once these cams are lined up, you can turn the crank. It's going to be about 30 degrees, and there is a dot on the oil pump housing, and then there's a tick mark on the crank there. Those will be lined up. Then you're ready to put the belts on. Obviously you're going to line up left cam arrow on the belt with the tick, right cam arrow on the belt with the tick, and then down on the bottom there's a few marks. The first ones are these marks here. Those will line up with the key. There's two more down here, to line up with the bolt hole, and then there's another one on the bottom that lines up with the, where am I? That crank one lines up with the white dot on the crank. And then it should be good to go. And then once you're ready to put the belt on, you want to go crank pulley first, idler pulley second, left hand bank. Make sure you're tensioned under the water pump, right cam, and then around the tensioner here. We found it easier to kind of pull the belt off, like halfway off of here, and then halfway off the crank, and that gives you a little extra wiggle room to pull it over the tensioner there. So we're going to remove the tension, or remove the tensioner pin, and it's going to apply tension to the belt. So it just says grab with pliers, pull it out. That was uneventful. So we're just going to check the timing. I'm going to turn the crank with the crank bolt in. It says to go 2 revolutions on the crank, and that's 1 full revolution on the cam. So this will go 360, the marks go 360 and line back up again, if the timing is correct. If it's not, we have to pull everything back off.
Next is to slide the crankshaft position sensor plate on, and it goes concave out. If you turn it the other way, it's going to be rubbing on your belt. Then you put the dust cover on. There are 4 bolts that are 66 inch-pounds. There's 1, 2, 3, and the 4th one's in the bottom. The crankshaft damper pulley goes on next. Bolt threads in, and it's go down to 181 foot-pounds. Obviously you can't tighten it without turning the crank, so we're going to have to fashion some sort of pulley. There's some bolt holes in there. Probably put bolts into those holes and into a 2x4. Put that down to the ground so we can turn it. Otherwise you need an SST to put into those bolt holes and provide some reverse torque on it. So we'll try that out and see how it goes. This is how we got the crank bolt up to 181 foot-pounds. Fashioned a 2x4 with 2 holes for some bolts that go into the pulley, and then a bigger hole for the socket to fit through, and then a long levered arm. Obviously the wood started breaking on us, so we put a C-clamp on it, and the bolts started bending too, so we just went forward and got it up to 181. Putting the fan bracket on. There's 4 bolts, actually 2 nuts and 2 bolts. A nut here, a bolt here, a bolt here, and a nut here. 12mm nut and bolt are 12 foot-pounds. 14mm nut and bolt are 24 foot-pounds. Once the 4 fan bracket bolts are on, there's 2 that go through the AC compressor. There's one that goes here. That's 34 foot-pounds. And there's one underneath, one next to the oil filter there. It's also 34 foot-pounds. And there's a nut right below it. The nut is 18 foot-pounds. The top one's the bolt at 34 foot-pounds, and the bottom one's the nut at 18 foot-pounds. Once the fan belt and compressor are all tightened up, there's a little screw that goes into this ground wire and electrical connector into the top of the fan bracket and the AC compressor. Next part is the drive belt tensioner. There's 2 nuts here, and there's a bolt down here. To get the bolt at the bottom, you have to pull the alternator off the stud and the power steering pump off the stud. Then you can slide everything on there. These are all torqued to 11 foot-pounds for all 3 of those. So we're moving on to the valve covers now. Clean up the seal where the gasket goes in. Press in the gasket, a brand new one. Don't reuse your old one. Clean up the gasket maker on the edges here. Then you're going to have to put a new gasket maker in the corners where it mates up in the front. They say to put in a little rectangle and kind of squish it up into those corners pretty good. up there in the top, and then down here on the bottom. And then there's 9 bolts that go in all across the top and bottom. That's going to be torqued down to 53 inch-pounds. So we're putting the spark plugs in next, 13 foot-pounds on those. Putting the ignition coils in, these bolts are 66 inch-pounds. Putting the dust cover on for the timing belt. It goes right below the water inlet. And there's 2 12mm bolts. They get torqued down to 12 foot-pounds.
So now we're putting the dust covers on the timing belt. There's 4 bolts. One here, one here, one here, and one over here.
One's a stud, sorry.
Oh, there's a stud here, okay. Oh, the stud from the crankshaft position sensor, camshaft position sensor goes through there. And then you want to pull the electrical connector through the hole. And then there's a grommet that goes...
It goes down there.
It goes in that hole. And then the bolts are 66 foot-pounds. 66 inch-pounds, sorry, for those 5.
Same thing with the cover on the right-hand bank. There are 3 bolts and 1 nut. Those are all 66 inch-pounds as well.
Thanks for watching the video. Hope you guys found it helpful. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to help us out. If you have any other questions or comments, concerns, leave them down below in the comments. We'll answer them for you. So tune in to the next video. Click right here, the next installment of this segment of 4 videos for this whole rebuild process. Catch you next time.